Dr. Judy Melinek. I'm a board-certified forensic pathologist, and I just watched the NOLAN WELLS press conference, and I wanted to share some context for everyone. Being able to definitively state the cause of death after a body has not been found for several days and has been subsequently autopsied twice with signs of decomposition is incredibly unlikely. Drowning is what's called a diagnosis of exclusion, which means that when you've got a fresh body, you want to be able to look at the body and see if there's any other causes of death for that body that is found in water that exclude the death being exclusively a drowning. So, for example, if someone is shot and then thrown in the water, you'll have that gunshot and they'll be bleeding and the gunshot will be the cause of death, and the thrown in the water is not the cause of death. It's not even on the death certificate. If a person is strangled and they die from strangulation and then their dead body is thrown in the water, their body will take on water, but the cause of death is going to be strangulation, not drowning. Also, for any kind of traumatic injuries. Now, we got to talk about natural death for a second. If someone has a heart attack while they are swimming, and because they're having the heart attack as they're exercising in the water and they take on water and they drown, the cause of death is actually drowning, and the heart attack is listed on the death certificate under other significant conditions contributing to death. So even though the heart attack might have killed them on dry land, it might not have. Most certainly they wouldn't have drowned on dry land. So we defer to the hostile environment, which is the water, to call it a drowning. Now, identifying natural disease and identifying trauma is relatively easy in a fresh body. It can be very difficult in a decomposed body. His body was found 2 days after he disappeared, and this second autopsy done by Dr. Roger Mitchell wasn't until 4 days later. So we're dealing with quite a bit of decomposition, even if the body was refrigerated during that time. And then we have this other issue of the fact that not all the results are back. The toxicology would have been done on the fluids from the body from the first autopsy. From the second autopsy, you're going to have a lot higher alcohol levels from the decomposition caused by bacteria, not caused by drinking. So again, it's the fluid and blood from the first autopsy that really matter. And the other thing you have to consider, and there's one other important piece of information from that press conference, which is that the neck block, the portion of the neck from the front end, was missing. So Dr. Mitchell did not have a chance to examine that part of NOLAN WELLS' anatomy. Why is that important? Because if somebody is strangled, especially manual strangulation, the injuries are going to be to the front of the neck. There may be some redness at the back of the neck as well if, injury comes from behind, but generally this part of the neck doesn't have the major blood vessels and the airway. It's the front of the neck that does. So compression or damage to the front of the airway, that's going to be found in the neck block that is still sitting at the medical examiner's office that was not released with the body. So you may ask, is this common practice for pathologists to keep a portion of the anatomy with them at the medical examiner's office and not release it to the family? And the answer is yes. We will sometimes retain important specimens that have pathology in a jar under formaldehyde at the medical examiner's office for further examination or as evidence. And the absence of that neck block is really important because we still don't have information from the first autopsy that has not been released yet. So we don't know if it was kept out of an abundance of caution, meaning that it didn't have any findings and it was negative, or it was kept because it has findings, because there's a broken hyoid bone, or because there's hemorrhage in the strap muscles. Until we get that first autopsy report, we don't know why it's been retained. So why should anybody do a second autopsy? A second autopsy is often done in cases where there is a high-profile case such as this, or there is concern from the family for foul play, and they're just not getting answers from the medical examiner's office because the medical examiner's office is still doing their investigation and is keeping things under wraps, because if there is foul play, they have the evidence, they have the physical evidence that might be able to trap the killer, and they don't want to release that to the public. Even if there is no evidence of foul play, just the lack of evidence is evidence and is important information that might affect how people are interrogated, whether they're going to tell the truth or not the truth about what happened to him. You have to understand that the medical examiner's autopsy is legally mandated, and it is ultimately the most independent autopsy because it's not beholden to the family, it's not beholden to the prosecutor, to the police, to anybody else. It's an independent agency. So that is an independent autopsy, but it takes time. And it takes time until we get all the information back, including the toxicology report. And to answer the question, if somebody's intoxicated and they drown as a result of their intoxication, meaning that they're just, too intoxicated to be able to swim adequately, the cause of death would still be a drowning, but the intoxication would be considered a significant contributing condition. But because of what I said about alcohol forming from bacteria after death, if the body is decomposed, you have to subtract some of that alcohol because it may have been caused by bacteria and may not have been a sign of intoxication. And you can have up to 0.20 gram percent. So 0.08 is above the legal limit in most states for driving, but you can get up to 0.20 in a massively decomposed body. So it really throws you off when you have decomposition and alcohol to try to figure out whether there was alcohol on board or whether all of it's just been made by bacteria. So I hope this answers some questions about what I saw in the press conference, what other people saw as well. I will go through the autopsy, or at least the report that's been released with a fine-tooth comb, but this is just my first impressions based on watching the press report.
It was a blistering summer weekend along the water when 18 years, NOLAN Wells vanished without a trace, leaving behind an agonizing trail of unanswered questions, broken promises, and a family plunged into every parent's worst nightmare. For 2 long, agonizing days, desperate search teams combed the murky currents, hopping against hope for a miracle, only for that fragile hope to be shattered when Nolan's lifeless body was finally recovered from the dark, shifting waters. But before the water had even dried on the shoreline, before a single incision had been made on the autopsy table, and before any forensic expert had examined his body, local authorities made a sweeping public declaration that stunned those who knew him best. There was no foul play involved. That single, premature declaration set off a firestorm of controversy that would tear open a rift between local law enforcement and a grieving family determined to uncover the unvarnished truth. Because in the world of forensic pathology, calling a death in the water an accidental drowning is not something you do on a hunch or at a microphone. Drowning is what medical examiners call a diagnosis of exclusion, a painstaking, methodical verdict that can only be reached after every single alternative explanation, from blunt force trauma to lethal poison, from head injuries to manual strangulation, has been systematically tested, analyzed, and thoroughly ruled out. If you are following this investigation and want to support independent true crime coverage that digs deep beneath the official headlines, please take a moment right now to hit the like button, subscribe to True Crime Exposure, turn on all post notifications, and drop your initial thoughts in the comments section below. Do you believe official declarations made before an autopsy can ever be trusted? When Nolan's family refused to accept the official narrative, they took the extraordinary step of commissioning an independent second autopsy led by renowned forensic pathologist Dr. Roger Mitchell, alongside civil rights attorney Ben Crump. But what that secondary examination uncovered, and what it failed to find, only deepened the haunting mystery surrounding Nolan's final hours. When Dr. Mitchell received the body, a crucial piece of physical evidence was conspicuously absent. The entire front structure of Nolan's neck, known in forensic medicine as the neck block, had been retained by the state medical examiner's office and held back under seal. Without those delicate, critical structures, the hyoid bone, the strap muscles, and the airway, it was physically impossible for any independent pathologist to determine whether Nolan Wells had suffered the telltale trauma of manual strangulation before his body ever touched the water. When board-certified forensic pathologist Dr. Judy Melinek reviewed the emerging evidence and the conflicting official statements, her expert analysis brought the profound scientific uncertainties of this case into stark, undeniable focus. From unexplained deep tissue hemorrhaging discovered at the base of Nolan's skull to the complex, confounding realities of post-mortem toxicology and tidal currents that defied basic physics, the evidence in this case tells a story far darker and far more complex than a simple tragic accident. Long before his name became etched into forensic reports and press releases, Nolan Wells was defined by a quiet, steady presence that grounded everyone around him. At 18 years old, he carried a bright, ambitious energy, navigating early adulthood with clear goals, a tight-knit family, and an unshakable sense of loyalty. Friends described him as someone who naturally moved through life without seeking conflict, preferring laughter over confrontation and taking pride in keeping his personal circle close. To his family, Nolan was a reliable anchor, a young man who kept in constant communication, never let a day pass without checking in, and whose future seemed wide open with possibility. Yet beneath the calm exterior of that summer, subtle shifts were beginning to form in Nolan's social sphere. Over the weeks leading up to the holiday weekend, subtle tensions had begun to ripple through his friend group, minor friction points, unexpressed rivalries, and underlying dynamics that only became apparent in hindsight. Nolan had agreed to join a small group of acquaintances for a weekend outing near the water, a simple trip meant for relaxation, sun, and summer celebration. But as the boat drifted out into open water, the atmosphere shifted, marked by heavy drinking, changing moods, and unrecorded interactions isolated miles from the mainland. As afternoon faded into evening, the digital trail left behind by Nolan's phone painted a chilling portrait of growing unease. Brief text exchanges stopped. Social media updates abruptly ended. Those close to him would later recall that the silence felt wrong almost immediately. Nolan was not the kind of person to go dark without a word, especially in an environment dominated by alcohol and open water. Late into the night, as the rest of the party gathered near the shore, Nolan vanished from sight, disappearing into the darkness of the surrounding current while those around him remained on the boat. What actually transpired in those final, shadowed minutes remains the black hole at the center of this case. Accounts provided by those on board offered only vague, fragmented timelines. A sudden realization that he was missing, frantic glances over the side of the deck, and delayed calls for help that raised immediate questions about what was witnessed and what was left unsaid. By the time emergency crews were alerted, precious hours had slipped away. The quiet summer night had given way to a frantic search, setting the stage for a tragic recovery that would spark one of the most contentious forensic disputes in recent memory. When the news broke that Nolan Wells's body had been recovered after 2 grueling days in the water, official statements moved at an unexpected speed. Long before laboratory results were finalized or a comprehensive examination could take place, local authorities publicly framed the tragedy as an accident, suggesting no foul play was suspected. But in the meticulous world of forensic science, a body found in water cannot be classified so easily. Drowning is fundamentally a diagnosis of exclusion. To legally and scientifically declare that a person died from taking water into their lungs, every other potential mechanism of death, from fatal head trauma to drug toxicity, internal blunt force, or manual strangulation, must first be systematically tested and ruled out. When officials declare an outcome before the science is completed, it creates a lingering shadow over every detail that follows. Seeking clarity away from initial official declarations, Nolan's family turned to independent forensic pathology, bringing in Dr. Roger Mitchell to conduct a second autopsy. Yet, as Dr. Judy Melinek, a board-certified forensic pathologist unaffiliated with either side, explained when breaking down the case details, a second autopsy on a decomposed body is never a clean reset. Time is the enemy of physical evidence. A body submerged for days and subsequently autopsied twice undergoes natural breakdown that obscures subtle internal markers. But what drew the most intense scrutiny during this independent review was not just the passage of time, but what was missing from the examination table altogether. The front structures of the neck, known forensically as the neck block, had been retained by the state medical examiner's office and were not provided for the second examination. To the public, the retention of internal tissue can easily sound like a sinister concealment. Dr. Melinek clarified that keeping organs or specific anatomical blocks for preservation under formaldehyde is actually standard practice, especially in high-profile or uncertain cases, to preserve delicate evidence or conduct further microscopic studies. However, the absence of that neck block carries immense weight for the investigation itself. The front of the neck houses the hyoid bone, the delicate strap muscles, and the primary airway, the precise locations where physical evidence of manual strangulation would reside. If pressure had been applied to Nolan's throat before he entered the water, the fractures, internal muscle hemorrhages, or petechial patterns would exist within that specific tissue. Without access to the neck block, independent examiners were left unable to verify or rule out manual strangulation, leaving the ultimate cause and manner of death categorized as undetermined.
And there's one other important piece of information from that press conference, which is that the neck block, the portion of the neck from the front end, was missing. So Dr. Mitchell did not have a chance to examine that part of Nolan Wells' anatomy. Why is that important? Because if somebody is strangled, especially manual strangulation, the injuries are going to be to the front of the neck. There may be some redness at the back of the neck as well if, injury comes from behind, but generally this part of the neck doesn't have the major blood vessels and the airway. It's the front of the neck that does. So compression or damage to the front of the airway, that's going to be found in the neck block that is still sitting at the medical examiner's office that was not released with the body.
Adding to the complexity was a 12 by 8-inch focal area of deep red discoloration documented on the back of Nolan's head during the secondary examination, without any visible tears to the skin or fractures to the skull. While some speculated this signaled a heavy blow prior to entering the water, Dr. Melinek offered a crucial, grounded forensic perspective. During initial autopsies, a rigid block is routinely placed beneath the head to elevate the neck for dissection. Pressure from that block sitting against decomposing soft tissue can cause post-mortem pooling and deep discoloration that closely mimics internal bleeding. Only microscopic tissue analysis can definitively distinguish between actual antemortem blunt force trauma and routine post-mortem positioning. Furthermore, early discussions surrounding toxicology were cautioned against oversimplification. In bodies recovered after extended periods in warm water, post-mortem bacterial activity naturally generates internal alcohol, meaning raw laboratory readings cannot be automatically read as pre-mortem intoxication without careful bacterial adjustment. As Dr. Melinek emphasized, no single lab slide or isolated autopsy report answers a case of this magnitude on its own. The physical findings serve as pieces of a much larger puzzle, one that ultimately relies on rigorous police work, digital evidence analysis, and establishing precisely who was with Nolan Wells in his final moments. As the independent investigation deepened, attention sharpened on the specific physical evidence that remained locked behind official state seals. The retention of Nolan's neck block created an insurmountable technical barrier for outside experts trying to verify the initial findings. In forensic pathology, the distinction between drowning and manual strangulation lives almost entirely within those few inches of soft tissue and delicate cartilage at the front of the throat. When manual strangulation occurs, the physical evidence concentrates high in the neck. The delicate horseshoe-shaped hyoid bone can fracture under targeted pressure. The thin strap muscles running down the airway often exhibit deep, localized hemorrhaging, and tiny burst blood vessels known as petechiae form along internal linings. Because the state medical examiner retained those exact structures, independent examiners were forced to work around a massive physical void, unable to inspect the very tissues required to rule out airway compression prior to submersion. While forensic pathologists debated the physical evidence, a secondary battlefield erupted over digital and circumstantial details that refused to align with early official narratives. During a major national update alongside civil rights attorney Ben Crump, NOLAN's legal team announced a dramatic shift in their investigative approach. Top national audio engineering experts had been formally retained to conduct a comprehensive, forensic review of the original emergency distress call. Rather than relying on social media enhancements or casual audio passes, credentialed engineers were tasked with isolating background frequencies, clarifying overlapping voices, and establishing whether critical statements, warnings, or names were spoken in the frantic moments surrounding NOLAN's disappearance. Simultaneously, the investigation brought in oceanic engineering experts to evaluate a fundamental physical contradiction regarding where NOLAN's body was ultimately recovered. Official reports indicated that his body was found in virtually the same localized pocket of water where his acquaintances claimed he was last seen. However, oceanic specialists raised immediate questions regarding basic aquatic dynamics. Over 2 full days, the natural movement of tides, current drift, low and high water cycles, and wind patterns should have carried a buoyant or submerged body a considerable distance down the waterway. The mathematical probability of a body remaining static in dynamic moving, water over a 48-hour window, presented a glaring anomaly, one that required formal forensic modeling to determine if NOLAN entered the water where he was found, or if his body was placed there after the fact. Adding further gravity to the mounting legal pressure, attorneys confirmed that federal authorities were actively providing digital support to the case, specifically surrounding a joint forensic examination of multiple cellular devices. Rather than focusing solely on NOLAN's recovered phone, which had shown evidence of data gaps, investigators expanded their scope to analyze the devices of everyone present on the boat that night. With federal forensic tools brought to bear on location data, deleted messaging threads, and call logs across all associated devices, the investigation moved past surface-level assumptions, forcing a rigorous, technical accounting of every individual who shared NOLAN's final hours. When stripping away the online noise, social media speculation, and emotional commentary, the verified factual framework surrounding the death of 18-year-old NOLAN Wells remains centered on a precise sequence of events on Mississippi's Gulf Coast. On July 4, NOLAN vanished during a boat excursion with friends at Horn Island. 2 days later, on July 6, his body was recovered near the northwestern tip of the island, in the general vicinity of where the boat had been anchored. While early local statements hinted at an accidental drowning without immediate indicators of foul play, the official state autopsy report conducted by the Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office was formally sealed, placed under a protective hold, and directed toward a future grand jury review without public disclosure of its initial findings or complete toxicology panels. Facing an official seal and an absence of definitive answers, NOLAN's parents, Christine and Elmore Wonsley, sought an independent review led by forensic pathologist Dr. Roger Mitchell and civil rights attorney Ben Crump. Released publicly on July 22, Dr. Mitchell's preliminary independent report officially classified both the cause and manner of death as undetermined pending further investigation. The report explicitly confirmed that no external skin lacerations, bone fractures, or deep structural skull injuries were present. While a 12 by 8-inch area of red discoloration was identified in the soft tissue near the occipital bone at the back of the head, forensic experts, including Dr. Judy Melinek and outside observers, noted that post-mortem blood settling or pressure from stainless steel head blocks used during initial autopsies can produce identical tissue discoloration, requiring microscopic histology before any traumatic mechanism can be inferred. Crucially, the independent report verified the primary scientific limitation hindering a conclusive second opinion. The initial state medical examiner retained the internal structures of Nolan's neck, including the trachea and hyoid bone, as well as internal organs, during the first autopsy. While retaining anatomical blocks for preservation in formaldehyde is a standard, recognized forensic protocol in suspicious or high-profile cases, its practical effect meant independent pathologists could not directly evaluate the airway for water presence or inspect the throat for the microhemorrhages, strap muscle tearing, or hyoid fractures characteristic of manual strangulation. Until those retained tissues and initial microscopic slides are made accessible, independent verification of strangulation or drowning remains scientifically impossible. As the legal battle shifts toward the grand jury and potential joint forensic examinations of digital evidence, cellular devices, and distress call recordings, the core reality of the case remains unresolved. For Nolan's family, who have weathered both profound grief and an onslaught of targeted online harassment, the objective remains singular: securing full forensic transparency. In the intersection of forensic science, sealed state records, and unanswered questions, the true story of Nolan Wells's final moments continues to wait for the complete evidence to finally come to light. What detail in this complex forensic puzzle do you believe holds the key to uncovering the truth? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this breakdown insightful, please like, share, subscribe to True Crime Exposure, and turn on all post notifications so you never miss an update on this ongoing investigation.